Welcome to Better Student Ministries. My name's Mark Freeman and this is Jared Barry, and together we have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
We're so glad you're checking out this resource. Along with every video, we'll be releasing a downloadable PDF, which has a section for note-taking as well as all of our discussion questions so you and your team can wrestle through the topics that we're talking about in each video. We're hoping that this resource inspires and equips you to pursue having better student ministries. Hey everybody, welcome to Better Student Ministries. My name is Jared, this is Mark. We're so glad to be back with you. And today we're talking about a really important topic, creating great small groups. Small groups are so essential. They're, of course, the biblical model that Jesus used to do so much of his ministry, but often they're a difficult and challenging part of youth ministry. So today we want to share some thoughts that we have about creating great small groups. Mark, I know this has been important to you in your years of youth ministry, so I'd love to hear your take on creating great small groups.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really good for us to keep in mind is there are lots of different ways to do small groups. I think we typically think of another night at Sister So-and-so's house who's hosting, and the kids come there and we do our Bible study and we eat some snacks or play some games, things like that.
Right.
And I think that is good and a way to do small groups, but I think it's helpful to realize there's lots of creative ways in which we can create small group communities together. So one example would be, on your large group gathering nights, you can be intentional about creating small groups. One of the things that we did in our youth ministry, because sometimes this has to do with the number of leaders that you have, sometimes it just allows you to connect with students who wouldn't be able to go on another night, but to still have that small group accountability, that small group time. So we would facilitate small groups right into our Wednesday night large group setting. So for example, I would have all the questions prepared, and we would split our group up within the space that we were meeting in. And so usually we would split them up by gender and then by age group. So we'd have the junior high boys together, senior high boys together, vice versa. And then I would introduce whatever the topic is that we were going to talk about, and then present the first question, give any explanation that's needed to, and then I would leave it to the small groups to talk about that question. And then when they were done talking, I would gather everyone, or it was sometimes really helpful to get feedback. Hey, what did you guys just talk about? Because sometimes it's good for the junior high boys to hear what the senior high girls say about something, and vice versa as well. So because we're all in the same room, we can have the small group discussion, but we can still learn from one another, and I could help facilitate, I could clarify any questions that needed to happen, keep things moving. And so they're getting the intimacy of the small group, but we're able to do it on our main group meeting night. And we found that as we did that more regularly, man, they jumped right into those small group discussions. It may be hard and funky in your space, depending on what it is, to get started, but once that becomes a regular rhythm for you, not only did they look forward to it, but they would jump right in and almost pick up the conversation where it left off the last time.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's awesome and a great idea, and I love the emphasis on saying small groups are a non-essential, they're non-negotiable, because you can't make disciples without having those moments where leaders and students are investing together in a smaller group. It can't just happen in a large group setting. One of the ideas that we used to do is we would do our Wednesday night large group service, but then on Sunday mornings, we had multiple services at our church, so we were able to pull this off. But on Sunday mornings, we would do our small groups on that time. And so we had leaders who, they would be inviting their group of guys or their group of girls, whoever's in their small group, and they'd be spread out kind of all over our church campus doing different stuff. And a lot of the parents were extremely excited about it because they knew the leader who was the small group leader of their students. They knew that they were going to be pouring in, and they were having conversations about what was happening at the service a couple nights before, what was happening in their lives. And as I started to do it every week, week in and week out, it was a great way of connecting with students, getting them excited about being present on a Sunday morning. Yeah. And so that was one idea that we used to use as well.
Yeah, another thing to consider too is you may already have small groups identified that you don't even realize. So for example, the team that is your Wednesday night, your youth group worship team, or your media team, or a serve team together, they can very much function as a small group as they're encouraging each other, supporting one another. Fine arts for us was small groups was an essential part of it. It takes so much time, it takes so much investment, so much involvement. If it didn't also have a small group discipleship component to it, there would be no way we could justify the finances and the time for it. But those coaches were the small group leader of those teams. And almost before every practice or on a regular basis, if they weren't dealing with relational stuff, spiritual stuff before their practice starts, often it affects what you're trying to do afterwards. So it was just a natural outflow that they would do small group life together in that way.
Yeah. I think it's really important to remind ourselves that small groups are essential in making disciples.
Yeah.
And it may feel like there's nowhere to fit this in, but I really want to challenge you that if we get creative and find ways to connect students with each other where they can start to live out their faith, wrestle through, talk about it, not just listen to sermons, but actually interact with what God's doing in their life.
So the next piece of this would be, how do we connect those leaders with students and the significance of sharing life together? So Jared, what's your take on connecting leaders and students?
Yeah, for me, this is essential in doing small groups. And oftentimes in youth ministry, and I know I experienced this a lot as a youth pastor, is I had leaders that would come in, adult leaders, and they would just kind of be there. You know, they were almost like crowd control. And maybe they'd have different jobs. Hey, can you help with this, help with that? But it was almost overwhelming for many of them because instead of them having a focused emphasis on a couple of students, it was like, hey, everybody's got everyone. And I think that was a major mistake. And so one of my encouragements to you guys is to say, in your small groups, connect adult leaders with a group of students who they are committed to in a long-term relationship. So for us, it was 1 adult to 5 students. And that number is arbitrary. Maybe a different number works for you. Maybe it's a little bit higher, maybe it's smaller, but it's got to be a manageable, feasible number. But we would say to our leaders, hey, these students are your responsibility, these 5. And so we would give them responsibilities like, hey, text every one of them before service, inviting them to be there. Mm-hmm. So it became a built-in outreach component, right? They had responsibilities to pray for them every day, connect once a week, whether it was text message, email, phone call, and then they would also have a responsibility to hang out once a month with these students. So for a leader coming in, they didn't feel overwhelmed by the fact that I've got to care for every student here, but they knew that these are my students. Mm-hmm. And it was really amazing to see that when we would do small groups on a Sunday morning, or like you said, during that service environment, those leaders were getting back together with those kids who they had now built long-term, deep relationships with. And they started to identify the students who were beginning to emerge as leaders. And then they were inviting them to be in a leadership relationship where those students were encouraged to care and love for the other kids in the youth group. And it was profound over the long term to see what God did in those small group environments just by connecting an adult leader with a small group of specific students.
Yeah, one thing to consider too, depending on how you break up the responsibility of the leaders that are part of your group, is there's something really special about being with a student from the beginning of their journey all the way through. So they come in and as a 7th grader, 8th grader, whatever. A lot of times groups will have junior high staff, senior high staffs. One of the things that we did that we found a lot of fruit from long term with those students is those leaders would kind of move up the ranks with their students. So they've already invested in them. They've already developed trust and rapport and things. And so as this little group came in, they may have started as junior high leaders, but then as those students got older, they would move into senior high with them. And we found that those relationships had lasting impact and fruit. And you can divide your leadership in any way you want, but it's one way to consider how to differentiate the time that you have. Yeah. Another thing to consider really quickly is when you've got a group of students that you oversee, and these are my 5 to 7 kids, then when small group is happening in an atypical way, we're going to so-and-so's play, we're going to this particular kid's game, instead of me showing up by myself to their game, bring the other 2 or 3 or 4 kids along with you to watch them. Then I'm not just sitting there for 2 hours watching, a sporting event that may or may not be very good, but I'm in relationship with these folks as well as supporting the life of the student that I'm in small group with.
I think one of the final keys that I would encourage you is if you have leaders who are assigned a group of students, make sure they understand the expectations and hold them accountable to it. So whatever your expectations are for how that leader is to interact and engage relationally with those students, if it's a once a month hangout or if it's a text once a week, hold them accountable in that. That's an easy way of measuring adult leaders in them engaging with their students. And it's really helpful for them because they know what to expect and what their roles and responsibilities are.
Yeah, so if you go in with the intention of, I have the opportunity to influence the lives of these particular students, I think it's going to be a huge win for your youth group or for your student ministry. So you've heard my take, you've heard Jared's take, now it's time to hear your take as well. So use these questions to facilitate your conversation. Thanks for listening to Better Student Ministry.
Question number 1. What are the small group environments in your student ministry, and are they effective? Question number 2. What are some creative ways that we can connect students who are not currently connected to our small groups? Question number 3. Does every adult leader in your student ministry know which students they're supposed to be connected with? If not, how do we make that happen? Question number 4. What are the expectations for the adult small group leaders in your student ministries? Are they clear and are they measurable? Hey everybody, thanks for checking out Better Student Ministries. If you've got a topic you'd love us to talk about, leave it in the comment section below. As well as like our video, subscribe, and feel free to share it with anybody that you think would benefit. You can always find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and of course, watch our videos right here on YouTube.